Hello and welcome to the Ending Body Burnout Show. We are your hosts, Chris and Philly, co-founders of a multi-award-winning functional medicine practice, serving busy people with energy, mood, and gut issues.
While busyness, addictive doing, people-pleasing, and perfectionism might be the norm, it's not normal, and it's a major contributor to health issues.
Our goal with this show is to give you a holistic root cause approach to healing your body so that you don't have to continue doctor or diet hopping or popping a gazillion supplements hoping something might stick.
So get ready to heal your body, get your spark back, deeply connect with yourself, and step into the life of your dreams.
Let's dive in.
Hello, podcast listeners. Thank you so much for joining me today. I so appreciate you being here and listening to our potty episodes. It takes a lot of time to create these. It's definitely a love and passion project. I love podcasting, but I very much appreciate you listening, especially if you're a long-term listener. If you're a newbie, welcome. Now, we have a bit of a different potty episode for you today. I'm talking to Jen Dugard, who is a trailblazing fitness professional, passionate about serving mums and exercise trainers. We're going to have a big focus today in burnout, but also the pelvic floor. And that's why I said before, it's a bit of a different episode. I came across Jen back in 2021. She was one of our coaches in a business program we were doing back then. And what drew me to Jen was her fierce passion and advocacy for mums to receive safe exercise advice to prevent pelvic floor related injuries and other postpartum injuries that are rife in the exercise world. The reason why I was so drawn to her mission was that I had my own personal experience of a horrible injury 6 months postpartum in the gym, which caused ongoing chronic pain for years, and it fed other body burnout symptoms. It was a big part of probably the worst time of my life when I felt very, very, very broken and burnt out. I don't want any other woman to experience what I did, especially the pain that occurred when I wasn't educated in terms of how to use my body and safe ways to exercise. So I knew we needed to get Jen onto the podcast. So get ready for so much gold insight into your body, especially the unknown regions of your pelvic floor. By the way, as you're listening to this, I share a very personal story about how I peed my pants in public recently. So actually before that, when I was at my worst in my body burnout episodes, I ticked all the boxes when Jen talked about a hypertonic pelvic floor, which we'll get into a little bit later in the episode. I was ticking all the symptoms back when my body was at my worst, was at its worst. And so when I discovered that, back when I first met Jen, I had this thought that I'm like, oh, well, I'm a mum. I've never seen a pelvic floor physio, which is what Jen advocates and recommends all women do. Even if you're an old mum now, even if you've got grandkids and you've never checked your pelvic floor out, Jen recommends everybody does. And so anyway, so back then, years ago, I had this thought, oh yeah, I should probably do that. And then I met with Jen again in April. We caught up at a conference that we were both speaking at. Same thought popped up as she was speaking. I really should get my pelvic floor tested. I don't have those symptoms anymore, but I think it would be worth looking at just to prevent something nasty from happening, like my uterus falling out when I'm older. But I didn't. I put it off, and then I booked Jen in for this podcast. And then I went away on a holiday to Fiji. Now, during that holiday, I full on peed my pants in public. It was really embarrassing. I'll talk about the backstory and my thoughts around why I think it happened. But it was just so interesting that I knew that I was going to be talking to Jen just days afterwards. And your unconscious mind and your body speaks to you in powerful ways. So anyway, I just wanted to add, as you're listening to this, I've recorded this intro a little bit after I spoke to Jen on this podcast. And I have booked in to a pelvic floor physio. So I'm going to see her in a few weeks, maybe even a month. She was very booked out. So I'll give you an update about how that goes and if my pelvic floor is nice and healthy and normal or if it needs a little bit of work. But I hope that, I'm a massive fan of lead by example. I'm not perfect. No one is. Our body speaks to us when there's some blind spots that need attention. So this is why I shared the story that it was very embarrassing about peeing my pants and what I've done since. Okay, so before we dive into the podcast about Jen Dugard. So Jen Dugard is the founder of MumSafe, creator of the pre and postnatal certification, Safe Return to Exercise, and author of the book, How to Love Your Body as Much as Your Baby. With over 17 years of industry experience, Jen is dedicated to enhancing the standards of care for mothers within the fitness community and beyond. Jen's dual mission is to serve both mothers and exercise professionals. She ensures that exercise professionals are thoroughly educated and upskilled in working with pre- and postnatal clients while also empowering mothers with the knowledge and resources they need. Through MumSafe, Jen connects mothers with certified trainers, fostering a supportive network across Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, and the UK. And she also serves on the board of Oz Active. Alrighty, let's dive into today's episode. It's going to be a good one.
Hello, everybody. I'm so excited for this podcast episode and with this chat with Jen Dugard, who is someone that I've looked up to for so long. I first met you. You're actually a coach in one of the business programs that we were in a few years ago. And so I found out about you through that. And because of our history, Chris and I's history with having a gym and a personal training studio in the past, everything that you said, I was just like, why didn't I have Jen back then? We needed Jen. So we're going to talk today a lot about exercise, especially for those of you who are moms, and preventing injuries and other long-term complications that can come if you're not ready to return back to exercise yet.
I'm super excited to be here and to have this chat. So thank you for inviting me.
Yay, so good. Okay, so we like to get personal with our guests when we first start, just jumping straight into your own story. So I guess why you now do what you do, but I definitely know it was after second baby, you had your own, what I would call like body burnout. So anytime that there's a mental health issue, especially post-baby depletion would be considered burnout, you experience postnatal depression, hey, and other things that came along from that.
Yeah, I did. It's funny when I received your question around body burnout, I was like, I feel like I've kind of escaped burnout in general. Like I'm not someone that gets sick a lot. I actually can't remember the last time, if ever in my life, I've been in bed sick, which is quite a cool thing. But when I think about, for me, it's been probably more mental overwhelm, and I'm sure that you'll go, yeah, but it is all related.
Yep.
But definitely after so I guess backtrack, my son was born 16 years ago. I have a 16-year-old, which is absolutely insane. But it was their birthday two days ago. And I say because they're born 2 days apart on the same day. Oh. So my son was born and I was 27. Motherhood was easy. I had this, not an easy birth, but he was a sleeper. He did all these things like that were the right things to do. And I kind of cruised through early motherhood the first time around, and to the point at which I started my business. But when I got to my second child, so 2 years later, everything changed. And whether that was her or whether that was me, I've been listening to some books lately going, there's a few journeys that we're going on with her. And it's like, is that in response to the way that I was, or was I that way in response to the way that she was? So she was a baby that never settled. We'd gone from this child that slept all night, had all these naps, and then went back to bed, to a child that didn't sleep. I don't think we got a full night's sleep in the first 18 months. And that's because we went to stay somewhere else. And I snowballed into postnatal depression.
Mhm.
And I feel like that is the way that for me, my whole life, whether it's burnout or it's my mental health that suffers first, somehow my physical body is generally okay. But from a mental health perspective, that's what I'm hyper aware to now because of that experience after having Indy, and then even before that, like in my late teens, early 20s and things. Yeah.
So when you were talking about not sure if it was me or if it was her, like, do you feel like there were some things happening in your life or dysregulation in your own system that then could have led to her not sleeping? Or
I don't know. Like, I've been listening to a book, and I'll be super open about it, a book on ADHD. It's called Scattered Minds. I don't know if you've listened to it or not. And it's quite a confronting book to listen to as a parent, because it alludes to the fact that ADHD and things like that are caused by an event. So you might be predispositioned, but there's a trauma event in your life that results in being diagnosed with ADHD. So as a parent, it's like, I thought that my response and the lack of sleep and potentially postnatal depression was because she didn't sleep and all of those things. And she was quite a highly, I think she got called overstimulated at one point. But then I go, was my response to that what triggered her response? It's fascinating. And maybe they just go hand in hand, and maybe there is no sorting it out. But I don't know, I'm quite a reflective person, so I spend a lot of time just going, well, if this, then this, and if that, then that. And it's fascinating. So I know that her being a child that wanted to be with me all the time, her being a child that was easily upset, that did not settle easily, were things that triggered my mental health response. But then it's this perpetuating cycle, isn't it, of this is what's going on with me, therefore I'm not able to show up for my child, therefore she is picking up on that, therefore
co-regulation.
Or co-deregulation.
Co-deregulation. Yes, for want of a better word. Yeah. So I'm always curious when we start these conversations, and if there is, whether it's a mental or a physical health journey episode, do you feel like the root cause was this baby and lack of sleep? Or do you feel like even if you were backtracking, maybe even before she was born, or anything that then happened after that, that really triggered the postnatal depression?
I know that I really struggled with an identity change. And when you talk about root cause, it's like, what is deeper than what you think it is? But even with my first baby, although motherhood felt easy, I still had this, well, this is me that is not a mum. And I really struggled with integrating the two. And it was, I wanted to have my business and I wanted to grow my business, and then I could be a mum, but they needed to be separate. And I wanted to divide my time. And of course, as a mum, it's very hard to do those things. So I know that there was an internal battle for me around identity of who I am and what I do. I also know about myself that I've struggled my whole life with, I guess, this lack of self-worth and needing that external validation from somebody else. It's not such a big thing now, but for all the way through my teens and my 20s and early 30s, there was this need for somebody else's validation. I don't even know, I'll let you put that together, because I've not put that together into that as yet, but that's the two things that came up for me when you talked about root cause and things that are maybe deeper than what was showing up on a symptomatic level.
Yeah. And do you feel like that was simmering beneath the surface with first baby, but because baby number one slept well and was like the good baby, you could still kind of compartmentalize your life? Then when your daughter came along,
maybe, yeah, and she was just like, you are not going to do that anymore.
Yeah.
But even 1 to 2 babies, right? It's like one baby, you can kind of figure out your life. You've got 2 parents, hopefully. You can do this while you take the child, and then a second one comes along, and it's like, well, either now we have a child each, or you're dealing with both of them. And I remember even, you try and get a routine with the second one and it's just not the same. So the first one had this routine, but with Indy, I remember like she's on my front when previously it would have been bedtime, putting her to bed, where I'm trying to bath a 2-year-old and do all these things that you just can't formulate the same. Yeah, so maybe like she just kind of went, it wasn't even her. It was just the whole circumstance of it's no longer possible to try and have these two identities without one consuming the other.
Yeah, I kind of think about it as a pressure cooker. It's like it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then it's like, okay, last thing, bang.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So during this time, you were building a business as a personal trainer, working with mums. Can we chat into that space? Because we are definitely going to dig into all things pelvic floor and health and exercise. So what did that look like? And also, do you feel like this experience that you had with the postnatal depression, did that really amplify your mission to create a safe space for mum, not just physically, but also mentally?
Yeah, so I was a personal trainer before having children. So I'd spent about 2 years in the industry pre my son being born. And then because it was so easy with him, I was like, what am I going to do? Am I going to start my own business? At that point, I was able to go to the gym and I was able to do all the things that I knew to do for myself as someone who was using exercise to support my mental health and my physical well-being. I did not know the right things to do. And I look back and kind of cringe on what I actually did put my body through after the first baby. But I found myself surrounded by a lot of mums that either one wouldn't carve out time for themselves to go to a gym, or if they did, they didn't know what to do when they got there. So I created a group training business for mums. Back then it was called Body Beyond Baby, and it was group exercise for mums in Centennial Park. And we had on-site childcare because initially I thought if I can bring my child with me, happy days. I soon realized that I needed to not have my child there, and it was okay for other people to pay attention to their child while they were training with me. But what I did believe in was, yes, bring your children with you, but I want to create an environment where there is some separation between mum and child. And now when I'm thinking about that, it's like I was going through my own need to have separation between mum and child. I was forcing that upon other people. I was creating a nice environment where they could do that, and there was no rules. Like if you wanted your baby there, you could do it. But I now in reflection go, well, that is why I hung so tightly to having the nannies and that childcare support system within my business. It was like the biggest cost to my business. So from a financial perspective, I remember sitting down with my accountant once and he's like, can you not just get rid of the nannies? I was like, absolutely not, because these women need the opportunity to have time out. So it was definitely born of wanting to help mums and creating a safe space for them to exercise. And then, I do think that once I had my second baby and I had that experience, the need to support women more from a mental health aspect definitely came in, and we still partner today with COPE, which is the Centre of Perinatal Excellence, so supporting women with perinatal and postnatal depression, anxiety, and their families. We actually ran a program there for a while where we partnered with a local business and we had a subsidised spot within our business that was for women experiencing mental health or other struggles. So,
I love that. I didn't know that that was part of your partnerships. So cool.
Yeah.
So then you transitioned out of being the personal trainer to training other trainers in your method.
I did. Well, yeah. So
or how did that all come about?
Yeah, of course. So I guess I've always loved reading business books, and I thought about franchising and licensing and all that kind of thing. And in 2016, I started opening different locations. So I had contractors working for me, and it was okay, but it didn't really, contractors can be amazing and they can be very not amazing, and people can be amazing and very not amazing. So I kind of was like, well, if I want to reach other mums, how else can I do this if I'm not multiplying the business that I'm in right now? So I wrote a pre and postnatal certification. So we still run that today. It's called Safe Return to Exercise. And we started running that. When I say we, I started running that across the country in different in different countries. So we've been to Singapore, to Taiwan. We've had people from the UK come through the course. So I started to do that in 2016. And I also started to become aware that I probably didn't want to stand outside in the park for the rest of my life. And in my head, I think I had like this 10-year time frame. And I wanted to start to think about what I was going to do next, how I was going to do it, who I was going to work with, what was the evolution of this fitness business that I ultimately ran for a decade in Centennial Park in Sydney. And I created, it was called back then the Body Beyond Baby affiliate team. So in my quest to look for licensees or potential franchisees back then, I met this wonderful woman, Magdalena, who still is within the business today. And she said, Jen, I want to do what you do. And I want to grow my own business, but I want to grow my own brand. I don't want to just pick up your brand and replicate it as a licensee. So I kind of fell into licensing and mentoring instead of licensing. Yeah. And that is what's now known as MumSafe. So MumSafe trainers run their own business, but they hold specific certifications in pre- and postnatal exercise. They are partnered with a pelvic health physiotherapist. They hold the correct insurance and registration, and they're committed to their ongoing education and working with women and mums. So, MumSafe has trainers across Australia and beyond. So it's very exciting.
I love it. So cool. I know I've shared this on our podcast, and also when we were having a conversation earlier, I had a pretty horrific gym injury post 6 months after having my baby, and I had very little knowledge of what to do or what not to do. Even when I was pregnant, I remember my doctor said, because I did ask questions around exercise, and I think the doctor said, if you are already doing that type of exercise and you're fit and healthy, just keep doing it, which I did. And then I thought that applied after you have the baby as well. And then I tried to do a deadlift with not even a very heavy weight, but really hurt my back, and it caused a lot of issues, and it was all part of my body burnout symptoms back then too. And so when I came across you, I'm like, why did I not have you and this information? So can you talk a bit more into what it actually, why is it important for mums and also trainers to have knowledge around returning back to exercise after having babies? And it's not just after birth either. It could be you might have had a baby 10 years ago. And are you doing what's safe for you? And yeah, let's go into that.
I think that the biggest thing that I just want to highlight in that is that women are not given any exercise guidance or any standardized exercise guidance in pregnancy or postpartum. And this thought process that, exactly like you said, if you've been doing it already, keep doing it in pregnancy and postpartum. Although all the research right now is pointing to we can actually do more than we've kind of gone through this, or I have, in the circles that we move in, have gone through this like pull back, pull back, pull back. And now a lot of the research is saying push forward. There's flaws in that as well, because in that saying push forward, we're not teaching women how to listen to their bodies. And I feel like it's a big get out of jail free card for a lot of trainers that just go, oh, the research now says you can exercise to a high level and it's not harmful and it's all these things. Yeah. But I think the most important thing is that women are not given an education about how to listen to their body, and also how to listen to their body when it's not necessarily giving them a pain trigger. Because in pregnancy, if you're a runner, yes, you can continue to run. Your body will probably run. Some women can run without pain throughout their whole pregnancy. Do I sit in the camp of women should run throughout their pregnancy if it feels okay and they were doing it beforehand? I don't. Absolutely not. Because what I know is the weakening of the pelvic floor potentially over time is not something that you can consciously feel. Like, if you have symptoms or leaking or a heaviness or a dragging, like, you need to listen to those, but they're also not pain triggers for a lot of people. It's like, oh, that's a bit uncomfortable. Oh, I just leaked, but it doesn't hurt, so I'm going to continue to do it anyway. So there really needs to be this education around, one, how to listen to your body, especially if your body's not yelling at you. And also, even if the body is not giving you any triggers, what could be happening, so that we can err on the side of caution, because at the end of the day in pregnancy, it's 9 months. Like, you know, women go, I want to keep moving, I want to do this and I want to do the other. And yes, research tells us that it's more dangerous for a woman to do no exercise in pregnancy than to start exercising in pregnancy. So that's another myth on the complete other side that we need to get rid of, that don't start anything that you didn't do beforehand, because that is also not true. But moving to the same intensity or just doing the same stuff because you were doing it beforehand is not a good guideline to kind of go with. And then when we come back to the postnatal side of things, your 6-week checkup is not a green light to go back to what you were doing pre-pregnancy. And I think the fitness industry have done a real disservice in this space, because we have adopted the 6-week checkup. So when you go and see a personal trainer or you go to a gym, they say to you, have you had a baby in the last 12 months? Well, you talked about this before. 12 months is not a magic number. So straight away, a PT that has no further education in working with pre and postnatal women will go, oh, you didn't have your baby 12 months ago? Cool. I don't need to worry about that. And we can delve into that a little bit deeper later on. Then they'll say, have you had your 6-week checkup? And then they'll say, do you feel okay? So the 6-week checkup is the end of the medical care in the postpartum period for the mum. It is not a green light to move forward into whatever exercise you want to do or the exercise that you're doing beforehand.
Now, when you're talking about the green light, are you talking specifically around the pelvic floor, or are there other parts of the body that you think about when you think about returning to exercise in a safe way?
Yeah, look, the pelvic floor gets a lot of airtime, and that's good, because at the end of the day, the pelvic floor holds in the organs of the pelvis in a woman. And when that's not functioning properly, we start talking about prolapse and incontinence and all that kind of thing. But there's definitely other parts of the body that we need to be aware of. So inside Safe Return to Exercise, we talk about the 5 key contraindications. So pelvic floor is one of them. Abdominal wall. So, you know, we used to get really obsessed with abdominal separation and closing the gap and all that kind of thing. And we can dig into that a little bit more in a second if we want to. Then we've got pelvic pain, because of course the pelvis has been under a lot of stress during pregnancy and you know, even into postpartum, some women will still experience pelvic pain. So we're looking at abdominal wall, pelvic floor, pelvic pain. And then also I'm interested in wrist pain, which often gets overlooked by a lot of people. So women can have, they could have carpal tunnel syndrome, which is the swelling of the wrist, which compresses the nerve. They can have what's called de Quervain syndrome, which is often known as mum thumb, and that's from overuse of the thumb. And then they can have general wrist pain. So a lot of the time with wrist pain, we use preventative strategies. So things like no creases in your wrists can really help not end up with a lot of wrist pain. So if you're pushing a pram, you know, make sure there's no crease. If you're holding a baby, make sure your hand is straight. The thing that supports wrist pain is rest. And I've never met a new mum or a mum that can really rest their fingers and rest their wrists. And then the other one that's often overlooked is knee pain. So a lot of postpartum women and pregnant women, but specifically postpartum women, will experience knee pain. A lot of that can be down to doing the most physically demanding job in potentially the most deconditioned state that she's ever been in, especially if she's someone that's had a desk job and has not exercised a lot pre having her baby. And it can also be to do with what's called the Q angle of your hips. So a woman's Q angle is wider than a man's anyway, and the Q angle runs from your hip to the middle of your kneecap. And then there is research to suggest that in pregnancy that angle gets wider. So it may be, if she's in a training environment, allowing her to turn her feet out more or find a comfy position. If she's picking a baby up and down off the ground, showing her how to do that in a position that supports any knee pain.
So those hips, is that just in reference to when you're pregnant, or they can stay out?
Well, in a woman, your Q angle is wider anyway.
Yeah.
And then postpartum, it is wider.
Okay.
Yeah.
So having an awareness of all those areas, is that to, one, prevent injury and also to adapt the type of movements that the woman can do in a safe way? Yeah,
absolutely. So
cool.
In an ideal world, every woman would have they'd have their 6-week checkup, and then they would have a postpartum screening, which is then going to cover all of those bases, especially pelvic floor and abdominal wall. And if people come across an exercise professional who really does know what they're doing, they will talk to you about pelvic floor symptoms. They will teach you how to switch on your pelvic floor. They will check you for abdominal separation, and they won't just check you for the depth. They'll talk about width. They'll talk about length. They'll talk about tension at the linea alba. And then we want to make sure we're asking other questions around, obviously, the pelvis, wrist pain and knee pain, with the caveat of there is only so much that an exercise professional can do within our scope of practice. So the other person that we would love every postpartum, pregnant and postpartum woman to see would be a pelvic health physiotherapist.
Yeah.
And another way, if you're a mum looking for a trainer, to know that your trainer really knows what they're doing is to say, who is your pelvic health physio partner? And if they're just like, oh, I don't really have one, that to me is a bit of a red light to go, oh, this trainer maybe hasn't done the amount of education that I might like them to have done to trust my body at this phase of life. Because I know after 16 years of experience in working with mums, I cannot do my job without the input of a pelvic health physiotherapist with the woman that I'm working with.
I'm pretty sure there's a lot of personal trainers that don't do that.
Yeah, of course there is.
Which is why you're on a mission to change that, and I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's dig into pelvic floor dysfunction because, as you said earlier, it is something that may be out of whack in a woman, and she might not know it. Because you don't have that obvious pain as opposed to like a joint. If it's wrists or knees, you usually feel when that's in pain. So what are some signs? Because we both spoke at a conference, Tina Towers, her Empire Builder back in April. And when you put up the signs and symptoms on the power planner, I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't know all of that was related to possible pelvic floor dysfunction. And I ticked off some too.
Did you? I think the biggest thing to kind of talk about first is going, what kind of pelvic floor, and I hate the word dysfunction around women, and I wish I knew a different word. I oscillate between pelvic floor dysfunction, pelvic floor stuff, which I don't, and pelvic floor issues, like who wants women's issues either. But pelvic floor stuff. So we can have, let's say it's a weaker, lower toned pelvic floor. So, and then we can also have a weaker, higher toned pelvic floor, which would be known as a hypertonic pelvic floor. Now, I say weaker, lower toned and weaker, higher toned because sometimes we make the mistake of saying that a hypertonic pelvic floor is one that is too strong. And I was definitely one of those people that after the birth of my son, the obstetrician said to me, your pelvic floor was too strong. So I kind of went, that's cool. I've got a strong pelvic floor. Like it fucking hurt. I ended up with an episiotomy and forceps and not forceps, Bontus and all that kind of thing. But I still walked out with this kind of badge of honor that I had a really strong pelvic floor. And what he should have said to me was, your pelvic floor was too tight. And when we think about a tight muscle, a muscle that's too tight can't move through its full range of motion. So if you think about a too tight bicep, can't fully extend to relax, and it can't fully contract to move through its full range of motion. So if you think about a hypertonic pelvic floor being too tight, some of the signs and symptoms of that, or one of them, which we often think about being only related to a weaker low tone pelvic floor, is incontinence. So a woman that has stress incontinence, so if you jump, you sneeze, you laugh, whatever, and you leak, that is called stress urinary incontinence. That is a symptom of both a hypertonic pelvic floor and a lower toned, weaker pelvic floor. Now, the important thing to understand is that the hypertonic pelvic floor probably comes with a whole host of other symptoms that are often different to that of a lower tone pelvic floor. So other signs and symptoms of a hypertonic pelvic floor could be lower back pain, could be glute pain, could be you go to the toilet, but you can't, the flow doesn't start straight away, or it's hard to get all the urine out, or you're not fully emptying your bladder. So you get up and you go away and then you're like, oh, I need to go to the toilet again, because that pelvic floor hasn't completely relaxed in order to allow you to empty your bladder. Other signs and symptoms of hypertonic pelvic floor that start to make sense for people are painful sex, and also recurring UTIs. So I can't tell you the amount of women that have been from GP to gynecologist, back to another GP, to another gynecologist, because they've got UTIs that are happening over and over again. And that's the common symptom, but no one's saying to them, do you have painful sex? You know, do you have any back pain? Do you have any glute pain? Are you constipated? And when we get those women to go and see a pelvic health physiotherapist, it's often the missing link that then they get taught that they have a hypertonic pelvic floor, that they need to learn to relax their pelvic floor to allow that muscle to move through its full range of motion. And then the UTIs go away because now they can empty their bladder and they don't have that urine staying in their bladder, which is susceptible to infection. And I think the other thing to really understand with hypertonic pelvic floor, it shows up a lot now in our women that have not had babies, our younger women that are exercising to a really high level, because what they're doing is tightening, and no one's saying to them, and now relax.
Yeah. Even, is it connected to, you know, how a lot of people are like, suck your belly in, and like, because I feel like when I do that, I have some sort of movement down in the pelvic floor as well, depending on how someone might be tensing different other areas of their muscles.
So that can go either way, right? So you can get someone, like, if you think about a ballerina, Pilates, like people that do a lot of like that sucking in. So they're sucking their pelvic floor up and they're pulling their abdominal wall in. So absolutely, that's creating tension. On the flip side, you could have someone with a very weak pelvic floor, weaker lower tone pelvic floor, who's doing all of those same things, like sucking a belly in. But what that's doing to that woman is actually creating more bearing down on her pelvic floor, which is detrimental as well. So really, we just shouldn't suck the stomachs in. That is the key kind of thing there. Let it hang out.
So with the hypertonic, because I think that now I remember when you did the slides and these are the signs and symptoms for a hypo, and this is hyper, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So when my body was at its worst, I ticked all of those symptoms, like the back pain, the hip pain, reoccurring UTIs, painful sex, difficulty urinating, but it was kind of more like I'd go to the toilet, thought I'd fully emptied, but then 15 minutes later, it's like, I have to go again. So I think that would be a sign that you're not fully quite releasing in order to urinate.
Absolutely.
So does pregnancy make that worse if a woman already has that happening, or if she doesn't, like, because I can understand the physiology of how it would cause a hypotonic pelvic floor.
Yep. It's probably better reframed as, does pregnancy make it worse, or does that make birth harder? So pregnancy could make it worse in that maybe no one's ever talked to her about pelvic floor, and maybe now she's getting told, do your pelvic floor exercises, and no one's saying, and relax your pelvic floor. So do your pelvic floor exercises and do some relaxation exercises. She may get that a little bit later on, but pregnancy could make it worse because now a hypertonic pelvic floor is being tightened even more because she's now got an awareness of pelvic floor exercises that she's never had before. She's just had all these symptoms and she's just been doing that. And then if you then think forward to birth, if she's someone who would like to experience a vaginal delivery, then a pelvic floor that will not open makes it very, very hard to give birth, which then leads us to things like birth trauma, forceps deliveries, long pushing phases that result in emergency C-sections. And so that in my brain, there needs to be this real education with all of our pregnant mums, regardless of signs and symptoms, but to get them, it should be in our healthcare system to have every single pregnant mum go and see a pelvic health physiotherapist at 20 weeks. Because if she has a hypertonic pelvic floor and we learn about it at 20 weeks, we've now got another 20 weeks after that, assuming she goes to full term, to teach her how to relax her pelvic floor. And if she gets to 36, 37, 38, 39 weeks and, you know, she's working with a physio and she's talking to her obstetrician and the physio says, look, you know, we've been doing all this work, but you're still really struggling to relax your pelvic floor. Let's have an informed conversation, an educated conversation with a pelvic health physio, an obstetrician or midwife, whoever's doing the delivery, and the mum herself, to choose and make a choice then as to what delivery she wants to experience. And this could go one of two ways. Someone could say, actually, I'm going to have a C-section because I feel like that's best for me. And that could really save that woman's pelvic floor and a whole host of birth trauma and everything that comes with that. On the flip side, she could say, and I've had a client that's done this, gone, I understand that having a hypertonic pelvic floor is probably going to make a vaginal delivery more difficult. I still want to try and have a vaginal delivery. Now, this client did have a traumatic birth. She did have more pelvic floor trauma, and she did have to do more work postpartum, but at no point did she say, why did nobody tell me? She could say, I knew that that was the potential consequence, and I chose that path. And that's the point that we need to get to, and that women are fully informed about their bodies so that no woman ever says, why did nobody tell me?
Yeah, I'm reflecting. 3-day labor, hypertonic for myself. And I remember practicing religiously those pelvic floors because my mom had to have a bladder surgery because she would pee herself all the time. And, you know, so she had a very weak pelvic floor. And I did not want that for myself. So as soon as my midwife started talking about make sure you're doing your pelvic floor exercises, but now I'm connecting that to that is highly likely why it took 3 days to give birth with all sorts of implications and interventions and birth trauma related to it.
And it just blows my mind that do your pelvic floor exercises, and this is how you do them. You contract and you release, because relaxation is a big part of a fully functioning muscle. Yeah. And you're going to need to do that when you're having a baby.
Yeah. Okay, so I ummed and ahed whether to share this publicly on the podcast.
Do it.
Okay. So I can see clearly that there were definitely signs, symptoms. Pretty sure I had a hypertonic pelvic floor. Things are a lot better because I don't feel like I'm ticking all of those symptoms all the time, but sometimes some things pop up, like last week. So we flew back, and I'm trying to like make sense of this. I'm like, was it just the circumstances? It was a storm of a bunch of stuff, or is there something that I should probably go and have a checkup about? So anyway, flew back from Fiji to Sydney. So annoying that I can't take my drink bottle, and they give you these tiny little glasses to refill. So I was really dehydrated on the plane, drinking as much as I could based on what I could ask for. Went to the toilet a couple of times on the plane, went to the toilet again at the airport, really wanted to go to a cafe in a specific spot in Sydney. So Chris is driving around trying to find a parking spot to go to this cafe. Just wanted some like healthy food. And then we had to walk quite a while to get there. So I'm walking, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I think I need to go to the toilet again. What? Again? I've already been like 3 times. Got to the cafe and I raced in. I'm bursting like, hi, is there a table for 4? But before that, do you have a toilet? I really need to go.
I shouldn't laugh. Yeah.
And then I literally started peeing myself, and I'm like, it's too late, gotta go. Ran out of the cafe. And as I'm walking up the path to like try and hide myself, I literally like peed my full on pee, not just a little tinkle, but I full on peed myself. And I'm trying to make sense of this. I'm like, was it that my body was so dehydrated? Was I in a stress state? Probably. Or is there also something going on considering my past history of a, I don't know, hypertonic pelvic floor still?
I mean, did you see it? Well, one, thank you for sharing that, because what I think is it's really important that these conversations are normalized, and somebody is going to be listening and go, fuck, I'm not alone.
Yep.
And that is really important, because every single woman thinks that every single thing they go through is just what they're going through, and it makes us feel worse, right? So it's conversations like this that we have to have, and more openly. So I would encourage people listening to share your story, but also to share their own story.
Share this podcast everywhere.
Exactly, do it. But also to share their own, like, what has happened to me that I felt really alone, that maybe I need to share with another woman, because that's really important. Yeah. But I mean, for me, I want to start digging back into, you know, when did you last see a pelvic health physio?
Well, I haven't. And I think after the conference when you spoke, I'm like, oh, even though my youngest is now 9, I think that would be a good idea.
I think it would be a good idea too. And I think you just hit the nail on the head by saying, even though my youngest is 9, because this is another preconception, right? Isn't it? That, you know, you have a baby, you're postnatal for a short period of time, but the reality is from the day that you have, well, become pregnant till the day you're no longer with us, you are now a postpartum woman, and you need to be aware of the signs and symptoms of things that are with you as a result still from pregnancy, birth, and whatever your postpartum period looked like. So, you know, it could be a multitude of things, but the fact that there's a clear symptom of something that happened, like
very embarrassing symptom.
Yeah.
Caused a lot of embarrassment, pain.
Absolutely. But your body's telling you something, right?
Yeah.
And you're all about listening to your body and it's funny, isn't it? Because your baby's 9 and we were at that conference in April and it's now July, and it's like, oh yeah, little sign, little symptom. Oh yeah, little sign. Oh no, you just got to listen to me because I'm going to give you a big sign, a big symptom, and now you need to do something about it.
See, this is exactly what I'm thinking right now, because things don't happen by chance. I'm like, I already had a clear, intuitive kind of like, oh, I should go see it just to check up after I heard you speak. And then knowing that this podcast was,
I was just about to say, maybe it's my fault.
No, it's not your fault. It's just that the unconscious mind is so clever.
Yeah.
That it's like, hey, yeah, this might actually be something that could be optimized.
Yes.
And make our life better. So let's do that. And also now, even as I'm talking, I can already guarantee that there's probably going to be something a little bit skewy, because I wouldn't have had these reoccurring signs if there wasn't.
So now I want to ask you why you didn't do something about it in April.
I feel like it was because the pain wasn't there. And this is how my body talks to me. It's because these subtle little signs first, but it's like, hey, this might be a good idea. But then if I don't listen to that, my body will talk louder.
Yeah.
Very embarrassing, in a very embarrassing way last week.
Yeah. So there was an emotional pain.
There was a trickle of urine going down the path on this very busy
I don't want to laugh.
street.
Like, I want to laugh, but I'm not going to laugh. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this, though, to me is symptomatic of the fact that as women, after having babies or in pregnancy, the things that happen to us are not necessarily painful. Therefore, we don't see them as important. Therefore, we don't address them. And it's the same. It's not just women ourselves. It's the systemic change that needs to happen. Like, well, women have been living with this forever, so why do we need to change it now? But don't you realize that women's bodies are literally falling apart and they're living with them because nobody has actually stood up and said, this is not okay, that women are leaking, that they don't understand their body anymore, that they don't want to have sex with their partners, that their organs are falling out of their pelvis and they're expected to continue going along in life and be grateful that they have a healthy baby regardless. And I get so frustrated that I've been spent 16 years in this space, and the fundamental changes that I can see so clearly, and my camera's not because it's going blurry. It's like, what is that about? That could be changed in our healthcare system, in our fitness industry, and for mums themselves, and they're just not being done. It's not of high enough importance. Like, how can that not be important?
Yeah. I love it. Something that comes to my head too, have you seen a pattern of women? I'm hyper focusing on the hypertonic because I'm like, yes, that has been my history. Have you seen a pattern of women? So you've got the hypo and then you've got the hyper. Do you see a pattern of women with the hyper where they are constantly stressed, overwhelmed, stuck in fight, flight? Like, I'm connecting that to busy, burnout, perfectionism, overdoing type patterns.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the statistics or the research or into that specific, is someone that is highly stressed, a perfectionist, wanting to do things right, more susceptible to hypertonic pelvic floor. I honestly don't know the answer to that, but I can see things like, if she's really, again, we talked about sucking your stomach in, sucking your pelvic floor in, like everything is tense. So it makes total sense.
Yeah. Okay. What can happen women support their pelvic floor health? So we've talked extensively around getting a diagnosis or getting a checkup. What then? So if someone's hyper or hypo,
I think for someone who has a hypertonic pelvic floor, so a 2-type pelvic floor, it's a lot of the, like, for me, it comes back to a lot of like the mindfulness. Can you breathe properly? Do you know has anyone actually taught you how to switch on and then relax your pelvic floor? So going to see a pelvic health physio and understanding the function of your pelvic floor could be really, really important. But some things that can very practically support someone with a hypertonic pelvic floor could be, spending time in child's pose at the end of the day, spending time laying on your back with your feet up against a wall at the end of the day, or in, happy baby pose if it's comfortable. If it's not comfortable, like could be like a laying butterfly kind of position. So positions that promote the ability to safely relax pelvic floor. And for somebody that carries trauma and things, they may need some support under their pelvic floor. So that could be, sitting on a Swiss ball, leaning forward, elbows on your knees, but knowing that there's something underneath, because it could be quite vulnerable for someone to just let go of their, pelvic floor, depending on what they've been through, what the reasons are for having a hypertonic pelvic floor. But in a very practical sense, doing that at the end of the day, doing that before you do a workout, doing that at the end of your workout, because your pelvic floor is likely to tighten and tighten and tighten during a workout. Learning to breathe properly. So breath work, even just diaphragmatic breathing, and even understanding that your pelvic floor actually, when you breathe in, is when your pelvic floor anatomically relaxes. And then as you breathe out, it's when you contract. That can be really helpful in a kind of gym environment, moving away from hypertonic pelvic floor. Seeing a pelvic health physio is like the number one. And signs and symptoms for someone that had a weaker pelvic floor would be things like, again, urge incontinence, stress incontinence, could be a feeling of heaviness or dragging in the pelvis, which is likely to be a sign of a prolapse, and a weak pelvic floor. Could be not being able to have an orgasm when they're having sex. So the superficial pelvic floor wraps around the clitoris and it needs to contract in order to have an orgasm. Some people don't know that if that's not happening for them postpartum, that could be a pelvic floor issue. Could also be a partner issue. We need to have a really good conversation with our partner. But it's good to know these things. And again, it's like women don't talk about it. So in terms of pelvic health support, see a pelvic health physiotherapist. Like that is the number one thing that I could possibly say to any mum, any woman that's ever had a baby, no matter how old their baby is. And even if that's a checkup, to go, you're fine. Because anything that's happening in pregnancy and postpartum that is not supported in the years afterwards is going to get worse as we go through hormonal changes of perimenopause and menopause. And my fear is that we're going to end up with this epidemic of women that are really fit, but their insides are kind of falling out because we've not paid attention in those 30s and 40s to look after ourselves when we're in our 50s, 60s, 70s and beyond.
And what I see too is when it gets that bad, surgery, but I've seen so many older women where it's like I have to go back for another surgery for whether it's bladder or the pelvic floor, because it's not a forever fix.
Well, that's because again, there needs to be this intervention of pelvic health physiotherapy. So a lot of people will go to their GP and then their GP will say, maybe a gynecologist, but then they need to go to a surgeon. And it's like there has to be at every step of the journey a pelvic health physiotherapist involved. So if you had someone who had prolapse and their GP or gynecologist has said you need to go have surgery, send them to a pelvic health physiotherapist first. Understand the function of their pelvic floor, get them to start to tune into knowing how to activate pelvic floor. They can use, it's hard to switch on a muscle that you can't see and you can't feel and all those things, but some pelvic health physios use what's called real-time ultrasound. So you can actually see on a screen, they put the little Doppler thing across the bladder neck. And when you activate your pelvic floor, it goes up. And when you relax your pelvic floor, it goes down. So for someone struggling to connect, you can see it on a screen. It's not the be all and end all gold standard of pelvic floor assessment because you need an internal. but it's really, really good for women that need that visual brain muscle connection to pelvic floor. And then the women that do end up with surgery, make sure they're under the guidance of a pelvic health physiotherapist afterwards, because that's where we can prevent multiple surgeries.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. So for ladies, women, mums who have been listening, whether it's they're identifying with a pelvic floor thing, or maybe even like the wrist, the knees, the abdominal wall, what are different ways that you would recommend exercising based on those things?
Oh, it's good, isn't it? It's so complex yet so simple.
Yeah.
So inside Safe Return to Exercise, and we pass this on to our mum clients. So, let's talk about pelvic floor to begin with. If you're doing an exercise and you're experiencing leaking, or you're experiencing a feeling of heaviness, or you can't consciously feel your pelvic floor, or you feel like you're bearing down during the exercise, they're triggers to go, oh, maybe this exercise is too hard for me right now. Maybe the amount of intra-abdominal pressure that I'm creating during this exercise is not something that my pelvic floor can cope with. So as some simple changes, so like let's say you've gone to a general fitness class, F45, I don't know, mass programming, not a lot of kind of individual changes. The exercise is a sumo squat, so that's with your legs wide. You can't feel your pelvic floor. Number one change for that exercise would bring your legs closer together. So when your legs are wider apart, it's harder for the pelvic floor to activate. After that, if she's holding weight, get rid of the weight, so reduce the load. Or you could pull in a bench and do a squat down onto the bench where you have that support. You can then consciously activate your pelvic floor and come out of that squat. Failing that, let's lay on the ground, take away gravity and put you into a hip raise. So you're still activating your glutes, still using your legs, hamstrings, quads, all that kind of thing, but you've now taken away gravity. So we've moved you from a sumo squat position to a squat position to a squat. We've taken away load. We've now put you onto a bench. And if that's still not feeling right, we've moved you into a completely different position where we've taken away gravity and we're pushing your hips up into the air. So there's always a process of simply, I wouldn't even say regressing. It is regressing, but changing the exercise to an exercise that meets you where you're at in terms of your pelvic floor. And you could be doing quite a heavy hip raise with a barbell and things, but because we've changed the load and the gravity and all that kind of thing, now we can optimize your strength because your pelvic floor can cope with that exercise. If we're talking about wrist pain, the number one rule with someone with wrist pain is no creases in your wrist. So could we very simply move her from a push-up in this position with wrist flexion to a push-up on her knuckles? If she doesn't like that, could we put her on some dumbbells? If she doesn't like that, can we do a chest press on a cable where she doesn't even have to grip the bar? She can keep her wrist nice and straight and she can push forward. If we're talking about abdominal wall, one of the biggest things for abdominal wall is avoiding that, peaking or doming that happens when we don't have good abdominal control or we have a lot of abdominal separation. So reducing intra-abdominal pressure again. So if you're doing a push-up and you get your coach to put their hand under your abdominal wall and feel what position that's in, or maybe you can feel, that it's pushing out. The first thing is to remember what it feels like to do a pelvic floor TA contraction, because for some women, when they consciously do a pre-activation, then that will put tension on the linear alba and it will enable them to do the exercise. So before we move you out of the exercise, we try and give you a conscious pre-activation. If that doesn't work, then we're going to move your hands into a higher position, so on a bench. And if that doesn't work, well, then maybe we put you on a bench and we do a lying chest press, because now we can actually pick up a heavier weight, work your chest and triceps to a higher degree, but we've taken away gravity and all of that intra-abdominal pressure by flipping you on your back out of that pronated position and reducing intra-abdominal pressure around your abdominal wall. So I guess like we work within, we teach trainers that you can have, let's say you've got 6 exercises in your session, and then along the top you'll have the 5 key contraindications and pregnancy. Every single exercise should have an adaptation already written into the program for each one of those contraindications in a group class, or if you're working one-on-one with somebody, you've already written those adaptations in for that woman. And then the cool thing is she learns how to listen to her body, whether it's painful or not. And then she learns the exercise that she does instead if it doesn't feel right, and then she can move into any exercise environment and keep herself safe. Like the coach could be going, do this, and she's like, that's not right for me, and they're like, oh, I don't, and she's like, that's fine, I know how to change it because this other trainer has educated me in how to adapt for me.
Which is so cool, because then it follows into functional living as well. It's like, oh, I'm picking up the baby today. The same thing applies to how you're moving your body throughout the day, as opposed to how you're moving your body in the gym, when a woman knows that education. Yeah.
And not only that, but we empower her through education. So instead of her feeling lost and confused and disempowered about where her body's at, she now has an education, she's empowered, and she can move forward in the way that's right for her. And then that goes into family relationships and how she connects with a child and how she shows up in the workplace. And it's just like this, if we could just get this education right, like it's this massive ripple effect.
She can go to a cafe without peeing herself.
Exactly.
Okay, last question. So you've written a book, How to Love Your Body as Much as Your Baby, which I love that title. I'm sure there's so much in there, but what would you say are some key takeaways that you could share with a woman, especially if she's not really loving her body at the moment?
I think the book itself is actually, it's 10 years old now, which is insane that I wrote it 10 years ago. But if we move away from the body and the functional side of movement and all that kind of thing, I think, even the title, How to Love Your Body as Much as Your Baby, if women could understand that their self-worth is not wrapped up in the size and shape of their body, we would be taking leaps and bounds forward. So if we could eradicate any personal trainer suggesting that a mum's goal should be to get her body back, if we could get rid of bounce back culture, if we can get rid of her even having that pressure postpartum to believe that another thing that she needs to do is shrink her body to what she think that what society has told her is acceptable, would be such a, it changes society and it removes that pressure that she doesn't really need. So if every woman could understand that her worth was not wrapped up in the side, and it's so easy to have it come out of your mouth, and it's shit I struggle with every single day. Like you look at your body, you compare it to what it was, and you shouldn't do that because it's not what it was, and you're a person moving through different seasons of life and, getting older, and your body's going to change. It's not going to look like what it did when it was 15. It's not going to look like what it did pre-babies because it's had a baby and it's now five years older. But yeah, flipping the narrative on what women believe they should look like.
Which is so interesting. I'm thinking about my wrinkles at the moment, which I was struggling with maybe like a couple of years ago. I'm like, I'm late 30s now. It's like, oh my gosh, my neck, oh my hands. But now I'm just like, hey, that's what a human body does. Like it's actually very normal to age, and for things to sag, and for things to do some things that, maybe isn't what a supermodel might look like. It's okay.
An airbrushed supermodel too, because we actually see them in their lounge room. Like
Yeah. Oh, this has been so good. So good. Thank you so much. I know so many people will have had so many light bulb moments, such as myself. Oh dear. So if there is a listener who wants to get some help to make sure that they're exercising safely, and also we have coaches and trainers listening to the podcast as well, where can people find the right information?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're a mum and you're looking for a trainer that knows how to work with you, or even a pelvic health physiotherapist, on our website, so it's mumsafemovement.com, you can go on there and put in your location and look for a trainer in your area. There's also a resource on there called Safe Return to Exercise, and it does say new mums, but it's a five-phase program, completely free, that takes mums through, their mental health, understanding their birth experience, understanding their body, and then how to start going through getting support. I'm going to say postpartum, but again, if you've never had any postpartum guidance, it's a really good resource to kind of go through that. And then if you're a trainer looking for education. You can also go to MumSafe and just click on the find it, like become a trainer button, or I put out a lot of stuff on Instagram. So at Jen Dugard is a really good place. I talk directly to trainers on that Instagram channel. So, and there's a bunch of free resources and stuff.
Yeah. So good. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. We so appreciate you. If you'd like to give us extra smiles, drop us a review and spread the love by sharing this episode.
You can also rate your own state of burnout and the root cause contributors by taking our Ending Body Burnout Assessment on our website. And if you're interested in learning about our group or one-on-one Ending Body Burnout programs, shoot us a DM via Instagram or Facebook.
Have the best day ever.